That brings me to our keynote address. So let me go ahead and, without further ado, introduce our speaker today. We're very, very proud and honored to have him here, Joshua Sachs. Joshua Sachs is the Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources for the Commonwealth of Virginia. In this role, Joshua works on not national catastrophe planning, maybe that too, but natural catastrophe planning. Only Virginia, and resilience, land conservation, historic preservation, wildlife, and outdoor recreation. Prior to his appointment, Joshua spent 8 years as a legislative director for the National Wildlife Federation, where he worked on an array of issues, including climate and clean air policy, agriculture policy, flood and hurricane preparedness, and toxic chemical reform. Prior to working at National Wildlife Federation, Joshua worked as the Federal Affairs Office for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Joshua has degrees from Ithaca College and St. John's College as well. So please join me in welcoming Josh Sachs.
Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. I am delighted to be here. Thank you all so much. And I'm excited to be here to talk about such an important and pressing topic, resiliency, and how do we better prepare for the next storm, the next earthquake, the next wildfire. First, I'd like to especially thank the conference organizers, Elizabeth Andrews of the William & Mary Virginia Coastal Policy Center, Kay Floyd of the William & Mary Whole of Government Center of Excellence, and Heather Macera of the Center for Climate and Security, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. I want to talk to you today mostly about how we can make the Commonwealth of Virginia more resilient to flooding, storm surge, other extreme weather events, and some of the ways that we hope to make this a priority for the Northam administration over the next 3.5 years. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and why I moved here, and I'd also like to tell you a little bit about Governor Northam's views. So you should know this is my 4th week on the job. It's my 4th week as a Virginian. So I'm learning. Before that, I spent about 10 years in DC doing an array of environmental policy. I started with air stuff, I switched to water. In between, I've done everything from Flint, Michigan lead problems to coastal barriers to Endangered Species Act, you name it, I've done it. When I started at the National Wildlife Federation, I had worked for Chesapeake Bay Foundation and other groups, and I thought I'm pretty up to speed on water issues. Clean Water Act, I know all about it. My second day at the job, they said, we need you to work on the National Flood Insurance Program reform and some bills to backstop state insurance markets for flood. And I realized quickly I did not know everything there is to know about water policy, and that was a start for me of a foray into natural catastrophe work that I thought might be a quick sort of work on a bill for a few days and be done, and it turned into about 8 years of work. I've been through 3 reforms of the National Flood Insurance Program, if you're familiar with that, including the Biggert Waters bill, which made a lot of reforms to the program, and the Waters-Grimm bill, which undid many of those same reforms. I was working on the latest NFIP reform before I left DC. I've also worked on Coastal Barrier Resources Act. I've worked with the Army Corps on levee safety. I've worked on a whole array of disaster policies, including Stafford Act reform and pre-disaster planning. And that had become my passion. I had thought that I would stay in DC for another 10 or 20 years and continue to work on that. As you know, it's a topic that is coming into its time now in a way that it hasn't before. Everyone in this room, I'm sure, knows that we have needed to be working on resilience for the past 20, 30 years. But it's only in recent years that I see more conferences like this. I read stories in the New York Times every Sunday about flood insurance or seawalls or climate risk. I thought I was in a great position. Well, then Secretary Strickler, who couldn't be here today but sends his regards, called me. I'd known Secretary Strickler for many years in Washington. We've worked on a bunch of issues. And he said, you should come to Virginia and join the Northam administration. I wasn't sure how that would fit for me. And then he started telling me some things about Governor Northam. Governor Northam has had a front row seat to climate change and natural catastrophe risk and extreme weather mostly his whole life. He grew up in Accomack County on the Eastern Shore. He has been through Hurricanes Camille, Agnes, Isabel, Floyd, Fran, Irene, and a bunch of other ones that weren't big enough to make the Google list. He also has seen these things up close. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Tangier Island. Governor Northam helped build the airstrip on Tangier Island many, many years ago when he was fresh out of college. And this morning, Governor Northam asked me about a flood wall project on Tangier Island. He continues to see these things and understand these things. And when Senator Strickler called me, he said, you should come down here. The governor's serious. We want to plan a statewide resilience initiative like Virginia's never seen before, and frankly, like most states have not yet really begun to do. And I thought about it a little bit, and I thought about his pitch, and this northerner decided to move to the south in the summer because this was an opportunity I just couldn't pass up. It was too exciting. Let me tell you a little bit about Governor Northam's overall pitch, too, and how this all fits. So the governor came into office saying he had a couple top priorities. Top priority for the governor, of course, was making sure that the economy of Virginia would thrive and making sure that every person in Virginia would have a chance to find opportunity. Again, I don't need to tell all of you that without a resilient Virginia, that's not going to be possible. Businesses aren't going to want to come to Virginia. We're not going to even be able to properly staff the military because we need people to be able to get to the bases, to get home from the bases. We need a safe Virginia to have a productive Virginia. Governor Northam also talked at length about his passion and dedication for the environment. I spent years working on environmental policy. I've dealt with many, many legislators. Governor Northam doesn't just say the Chesapeake Bay because if you're an elected official in Virginia, you have to love the Chesapeake Bay. He loves it because he grew up on it. He says he finds his peace out on a boat fishing on the Chesapeake. For me to come and work for someone who was that dedicated to the same issues I cared about really meant a lot. I wanted to tell you that a little bit so you can understand both that Governor Northam, Secretary Strickler, and I are very serious about the initiative we're about to undertake. I also should point out that they got a head start before I got down here. And in the budget that passed just a couple months ago, I guess 2 months ago now, there was a small thing in there. Senator Lewis from Accomack and Delegate Stoll from Virginia Beach created a new resilience position. I'm sure some of you have heard about that. That's going to be a special assistant position that will report to the governor and the Secretary of Natural Resources. And our hope is that once we've built out an initiative, that person will be the day-to-day implementer of our whole of government approach to making a more resilient Virginia. I'm going to talk to you more about that as we go on, but I wanted to note that they've already been making progress. Now it's time for the hard work. The hard work hasn't really begun yet, and I'm hoping that all of you can be part of that. I'm pleased to be here at the Whole of Government Center today because I agree that the only way we can be more resilient is through a whole of government approach. We need to be able to leverage programs that the military has, like the REPI program or the Sentinel Landscapes program, to be more resilient. We need to make sure our towns are more resilient so we can support the military in kind. We need the help of experts like all of you to figure out what we're doing and how to do it. So whole of government approach certainly is the approach we're after. Maybe now is a good moment for me to pause and tell you what I mean when I say a resilient Virginia. If you've done this as long as I have, I'm sure you're aware that resilience, resiliency, sea level rise, climate adaptation, climate resiliency. I heard a panelist before me say there were many terms that get thrown about that are undefined. I'm not as comfortable with that as he seemed to be. I like to define things. So here's what I think a resilient Virginia means for the Northam administration. A resilient Virginia is one that maintains services and livelihoods after a flood, a hurricane, a wildfire, an earthquake. I should be clear, a resilient Virginia to us covers all natural catastrophe perils, not just flooding. This includes ensuring resilience for life safety and human health programs. It means protecting property. It means economic security and environmental quality. It's our job to plan and build and secure so that when the catastrophe event hits, we can weather it and be back online as quickly as possible, without as minimal disruption as possible. That's minimal disruption to business, to supply chains, but most importantly, to people's lives. Virginia is where we live, and I don't have to tell you that after a flood or a storm, people really need help. If we can lessen the impact of those events, we've started our job. Now, once a storm hits, of course, people need to come in and respond. Typically, people wear helmets and orange vests and things like that. That's not part of the resilience plan of Virginia that I'm talking to you about today. Our Department of, or the United States Department of Homeland Security, our state National Guard, our state public safety departments, they're in charge of that. What I'm talking about today is what do we do between now and the storm, and then coming in 2 weeks after, how do we build back so that we're resilient when the next storm comes? I think I should explain to you some of the elements of what we're talking about, because of course this can sound very abstract. Of course everyone wants to be resilient. I've read so many reports from think tanks and other agencies that says we should be more resilient, but what I have a hard time finding is the answers. Go do this, go do that. Of course people can say build a seawall here, maybe some wetlands here would be nice, but how do we put it all together? So here are some of the things that we are starting to think about in the Northam administration. One, we need to do a better job at communicating risk to all Virginians. Many, many, many people who flood or see their home burned in a wildfire always say, I had never flooded before. I thought this was impossible. Or they say, I didn't even think I was in a flood zone. As you know, we mapped the 100-year floodplain. We make public the 100-year floodplain. We need to express or tell people about their risk in the 500-year floodplain. If we look at a storm event like the hurricane that hit Houston last year, 85% of the people who lost property were uninsured. That's simply a problem we have to overcome. And the hope is, if we can do a better job at helping people understand their risk, if conferences like this can help people understand how dire the situation is and how far behind we are in getting prepared to be resilient, hopefully people will come and meet us and help us become part of it. That can mean so many things. It can mean thinking more carefully about where you buy a house, or if you're a developer, thinking about where you might build your house. It might mean thinking about insurance. Someone today told me he bought a house on the Eastern Shore and was shocked to hear that he didn't need flood insurance. He wasn't mapped in, and I said, well, what did you do? And he said, well, I went and got it anyway. I need more people like that, and my sense is that that guy's rare. Another thing we need to do is we need to harmonize the various state, federal, and local programs that are designed to keep us safe. In my 4 weeks here on the job, I've been trying to, just within the Virginia government, talk to the various secretariats and the various agencies. And every time I talk to people, they say, oh, we have this program that sits under this other program, and we don't even really do resilience. Maybe you can fold that in. Or some people will come up to us and talk about a problem, and we'll say, well, are you familiar with this grant? And they'll say, no, I only talk to a different agency. So for starters, we need to do a comprehensive review of where all the pieces are. Then we need to overlay that with the federal. We need to understand Stafford Act funding, pre-disaster mitigation grants. We need to understand how wetlands conservation or land conservation in Virginia can benefit resilience. This is a whole of government approach we need, and we actually need many levels of government. We need the federal government, we need the state government, and we need to work with every town and municipality in Virginia. This is not something we can do alone. We need the buy-in from local people on the ground. These are decisions that are going to impact them more than anyone, and we need their buy-in. We need to do more to make sure Virginians are insured. I mentioned that a moment ago, but there is a significant insurance gap, both nationally and here in Virginia. I mean flood insurance, but I also mean fire insurance. People who aren't required to have insurance should still have it. We need to help them have it by communicating risk, but also, I'm not naive. I understand that many people avoid having flood insurance because of the financial cost associated with it. We have to help them. Does that mean we subsidize their insurance like the federal program has been doing? Not necessarily. The best thing we can do to help keep insurance rates low for Virginians is to reduce their risk, not reduce their cost. If you live in a neighborhood that is prone to flooding, the answer needs to be statewide, federal-wide investment to make your community more resilient. And that brings me to another point. We need to make sure that we're doing mitigation on a big scale, at the community-wide level or bigger. For too long, we've gone house by house, home by home, putting a home on stilts, putting a ring levee around a particular building, lifting hot water heaters off the ground. But that only helps the people who call out for help, the people who can afford help. It doesn't help everyone. Also, it doesn't give us the many ancillary benefits that community-wide protection can give. If instead of putting your home on stilts, we can create a natural buffer area in your community, in addition to safety, we can provide recreational space, pollution buffers for runoff into the Chesapeake Bay or the James or the Rappahannock. We need these benefits. So finding ways to lift our mitigation up to a broader level, to bring in more stakeholders and do bigger things is important. We need to be serious about protecting state investments in Virginia. Some of you may recall that under the Obama administration, a federal flood standard was proposed that would set freeboard for all new federal buildings. I don't know what the policy answer is yet, but in Virginia, when we build new state buildings, when we update facilities at our state parks, when we work on state roads and highways, we need to do this as well. We're going to start to think about that and figure out a way to do it. When storms do hit, we need to look at these as opportunities as well as catastrophes. Of course, it's terrible when a storm comes in and destroys a neighborhood or someone's home. We want to make them whole as quickly as possible. But if we can rebuild in a better way, if we can make culverts so they're built to last for the next century, if we can build seawalls using natural infrastructure now because we've learned that there are better ways of doing things than just concrete everywhere all the time. We need to do those things. We also need to encourage mitigation at the community level. We need to meet community planners and community leaders in every town and county in Virginia. That means not just sending out a pamphlet and saying, we hope that you are more resilient or we hope that you plan better. Communities are dying for help, not just financial help, but technical assistance, but information. And we have to do a better job at the state level of providing that and making it easy to find and easy to get. And that's something we plan on doing. So these are all elements of the plan that we hope to put in place before Governor Northam leaves office in about 3.5 years. If that sounds daunting and big and scary and frankly hard to implement, well, you heard me right. It's my job to be the center hub of the whole of government for this initiative for the state of Virginia right now. And I'm so thrilled to be here to talk to all of you because I'm spending my time right now traveling the state looking for people who can help me find the answers, looking for people who can help me understand where a program might be nested that I didn't know about, or understand a great new idea, or understand where there's problems that need to be fixed. And I cannot do that alone, especially having been a Virginian for only 4 weeks. So I'm hoping that this is the start of a long-term dialogue that you will come and talk with me today during lunch, or you will email or come see us in Richmond. But that's the hope, and that's what we plan to do. Now, if I was giving a talk like this somewhere else, I might do the bit where I scare people to let them know how serious this problem is. I could talk about melting ice caps and hurricanes and losses and all these sorts of things. My sense is that this room doesn't really need that. I don't think you'd be here if you didn't know all of that already. But just within the past month since I've moved to Richmond, we've set more records, not the good kind. So overnight rain in Richmond set the second highest ever, shut down the airport for over 3 hours. That was the second wettest day in Richmond history. The Rappahannock just had its 8th largest flood in history. And frankly, we're going to hear about a lot more of these events before the summer is over. We're going to hear about fires. We had a very small earthquake recently. Time for action is now. Governor Northam gets that, and he knows the future of the state depends upon it, and he's passionate about it. He's made it one of his top initiatives. I want to thank you all for partnering with us as we begin this journey. Thank you for listening today. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions and discuss anything you'd like.
Okay. Hi, my name is Craig Quigley. Josh, welcome aboard. This is probably not even a fair question after only 4 weeks in the seat.
But you're going to do it anyway.
Do you have a sense? Yes, I am.
Okay.
But do you have a sense of timing on when that special assistant will be named?
Nothing formal yet. Our hope is that to have that person named before the end of the year and hopefully sooner.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Josh.
Hi.
Great talk. I'm wondering what's your thought on the role of technology plays in implementing this resiliency plan you have? When I hear things about risks and sharing that information with the public, and when I hear the need to connect the right people in the government and potentially outside, it seems like there could be technological solutions that can greatly facilitate all that. So just want to hear your thought. Thank you.
It's a great question. There are many ways where technology is helping move these types of initiatives forward. So of course, the obvious thing to think about is the internet and social media and things in terms of risk communication, and that's great. But I also think of other things. I think of how much LiDAR technology has advanced and how much better we can do with flood mapping. I think about in North Carolina, for instance, where flood height elevation of buildings is very important. They were able to use trucks similar to what Google uses to do Google Street View and drive around and get the base flood elevation for every structure in North Carolina. We never had that ability before. There's tremendous work being done by modeling agencies, both private and public, to better monitor flood risk, fire risk, help us understand where we should develop or where we should perhaps do planned retreat. So those are some examples of how technology fits in. There's also technological advances that are helping us understand what good flood control is, right? So historically, there was a bias towards structural flood control. Now, modeling technologies and other things are showing us that natural buffers and wetlands and others can be impactful as well. So those are some examples of how technology is engaging. I'm excited about what's coming with that. How it will all fit into our plans in Virginia, I'm not quite sure yet, but I can tell you, just in my time working on these issues, I've seen tremendous advancements, and I think there are many more to come.
All right, so I've got the next question. So it has been said that to budget is to prioritize.
Yes.
And if this is a priority of the governor's, do you have a sense as to how that's going to show up from perspective of resources? And let me add one little nuance to give you a little bit of an out. A lot of the projects that we talk about cost a lot of money. But one of the other ways to effectively budget and have a significant impact is to set up offices and staff who can do a lot of that outreach that you're talking about. That would be a smaller budget requirement, but would also indicate prioritization in that context. Do you have a sense of where the governor's going and where your office is going from perspective of devoting resources?
Yes. So first, I mentioned the new position that was created in the budget that just passed, and that is a funded position. So I think the governor showed right off the bat he was willing to lean in. As you know, there were some other issues surrounding this budget that sort of were the top tier issues. Also, you know that in Virginia, it's a 2-year budget cycle, so we don't have a bite at the apple for another year and a half now. And we're hoping to have this initiative further developed so we'll know what to ask for. That's for starters. But I think there are ways to make progress even without a specific appropriation that says, here, go do resilience. So another thing, Governor Northam this summer announced a new land conservation initiative. He's passionate about conserving land in Virginia. We've always done that. We have tremendous tax credits and other programs in the state that help land conservation. But he announced that he'd like to do it a little bit differently. And Governor Northam tasked our Department of Conservation and Recreation with identifying the 10% of Virginia lands that are most valuable for preservation. And we're deciding what criteria are considered in that. Of course, historic preservation, nutrient load to the Chesapeake Bay, those always come up. But in years past, I'm not sure resilience value was a high priority there. We can do things like that, and frankly, we are planning on doing that. And that's a way to take existing funds and leverage. We also understand that we can go to the federal government for funds, and we need to do a better job at working with them. You might look at a state like Louisiana with its coastal master plan, which is big and robust, and they come away every year with millions and millions of dollars. Virginia doesn't have such a plan. That doesn't mean we're not trying to do anything, but maybe we need something like that we can take to the federal government. Maybe we need to do a better job at harnessing NOAA grants or things like that. So I take your point. Yes, we need more money. We talk about it all the time in the office. The governor knows, the secretary knows. I can't tell you how we're going to get there yet, but I can tell you that it's a priority, and we're looking for things as much as possible. Does that help?
Final question?
Hi, Josh. Andrea McClellan, Norfolk City Council. A lot of Norfolk folks here can't wait for you to come down, and we can show you a lot of what we're doing in our region and in the city along these lines. One of the things, and there isn't a lot of money in the budget for this, by the way, and we're going to have to be creative. And one of the things I'd like to work with you on is the opportunity to reduce the risk and cost for flood insurance, because it's a huge issue in the city of Norfolk and the region. What we need are almost a guild of sorts of folks who can provide surveys, engineering studies, all of the building to lower the cost for flood insurance for our citizens in Norfolk and the region. And we can't really do that on our city basis, or we can, but it really should be done on a regional or statewide basis. So that would be a low-cost initiative, and we'd like to work with you on that one.
We want to help, and I look forward to talking with you afterwards.
Please join me in thanking Joshua.
Thank you all.